President Trump has again accomplished something that defies common sense. Due to President Trump's pressure, peace may return to the Middle East. Israel and Hamas have agreed on the first phase of the Gaza peace plan. I wish I could always deliver news like this. Let's examine this topic. On October 8th local time, Israel and Hamas agreed on the first phase of the Gaza Strip war. President Trump announced, he said, "This is the first step toward lasting peace. All hostages will be released soon, and Israel will withdraw troops to agreed lines." On September 29, President Trump announced the Gaza Peace Initiative to end the 2-year Gaza war. The plan calls for releasing all hostages in 72 hours, a brief Israeli withdrawal, and outlines post-war Gaza governance. He succeeded in getting both sides to reach an agreement in just 1 or 2 weeks. This agreement is significant because it has created an opportunity to finally put an end to the war that has lasted for over 2 years. After Israel and Hamas sign the agreement, Hamas will release 20 Israeli hostages, and Israel is expected to withdraw its military from Gaza. Several Israeli military units have finished preparing for redeployment. CBS News reports the Israeli military will withdraw within 24 hours after signing, and Hamas is expected to release hostages within 72 hours of the withdrawal. President Trump says the hostages will be released between October 13 and 14. Clearly, this agreement is significant in that it has provided an opportunity to end the war that has continued for the past 2 years. However, since there is no specific peace guarantee for the Gaza Strip and detailed agreements and concrete implementation regarding key issues such as the disarmament of Hamas, the scope of the withdrawal of Israeli forces, and the governance plan for the Gaza Strip have not been reached, it seems that further dialogue is needed. The part that everyone is concerned about is none other than the disarmament of Hamas. The initial ceasefire deal lacks any clauses about Hamas disarmament. Since the issue of Hamas's disarmament is still being debated even within Hamas itself, there is a strong possibility that even if the first ceasefire agreement is reached, the second ceasefire agreement could fall through. President Trump keeps pressuring both Hamas and Israel. Israel's main goal in the war is safely returning hostages held by Hamas. Of the 48 hostages Hamas still holds, only 20 are known to be alive. Israel has launched extensive attacks on Hamas to rescue them. This war in the Gaza Strip clearly began with Hamas's success, but Israel's retaliatory attacks have been so ruthless that they have not hesitated to strike civilians as well. On top of that, they made a huge mistake by attacking Qatar, which led to pressure from the Western world. While attacking Iran might be understandable, Qatar is clearly a pro-Western country. As a result, 156 countries around the world ended up recognizing Palestine as a state, which was an unintended consequence. Because of this, Israel became even more diplomatically isolated. President Trump saw this as an opportunity and put even more pressure on Israel. This Gaza Peace Initiative was basically Israel's final warning, clearly stating that rejecting it would end further help. Considering that the United States was providing some support for Israel's war expenses, Israel was in a situation where they couldn't back down. Israel eventually agreed and kept pressuring Hamas. Before the agreement, President Trump pressured them to agree to a ceasefire before Gaza turned into hell, and his pressure worked. Hamas couldn't effectively retaliate against Israel and became completely isolated after humanitarian aid was cut off. But when they started threatening to attack even the United States, they had no choice but to negotiate. Although reaching a second ceasefire may be difficult, if President Trump keeps pushing for it, we might see results. Of course, there are definitely people who oppose this point of view. There are also many people who say that because the reform of the governing structure in Gaza and the disarmament of Hamas are unlikely to happen, a complete end to the war will not be possible. The peace plan calls for the Palestinian Authority to start a reform program and for a peace committee with foreign leaders to temporarily govern Gaza. For this to happen, the plan includes the condition that Hamas must destroy all its military facilities in the Gaza Strip and refrain from participating in politics. Many say this won't be quietly accepted. Above all, Hamas is quite lukewarm about disarming, so there are certainly people who think that clashes will continue to occur. Above all, there are reports that extreme conflict is about to erupt within Hamas right now. The ceasefire agreement is greatly disrupting the organization's power structure. The political leadership of Hamas has determined that they can no longer withstand the pressure from the international community. They believe that securing humanitarian aid through negotiations with Israel and promoting the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip is the way to survive. Some reports say members of Hamas's political bureau are creating unofficial dialogue channels with the United States via diplomats in Qatar and Turkey. They stress a pragmatic stance, saying if they don't disarm, Palestine's future will vanish. On the other hand, the hardliners leading the military organization are calling this agreement a betrayal. They still claim that Israel is an enemy that can never be trusted, and they are spreading the message that the ceasefire is just a fake peace meant to regroup their forces. There are also occasional reports that Hamas's military wing faction has regrouped. In other words, while the political faction is reaching out at the ceasefire negotiation table, the military faction is sharpening their guns again in underground tunnels. This internal division could cause a power struggle in the organization. Hamas had a centralized structure for years, but the ongoing war severely disrupted its command system. This is why Israel could keep assassinating top officials via airstrikes. Although unconfirmed, there are rumors that some mid-level commanders are ignoring orders and independently planning armed actions. If true, the second ceasefire talks will become much more complicated. Even if President Trump applies strong pressure, the ceasefire agreement could collapse if Hamas's military factions refuse it. One side seeks political survival by facing reality, the other insists on fighting to the end as a symbol of resistance. Analysts say the ceasefire could intensify political conflict between the two factions, which worries many people. If the internal rift widens, the second ceasefire talks may become a power struggle and fight for survival within Hamas, not just a diplomatic issue. And at that moment, the word peace that we are seeing now might return to a reality stained with blood. Hamas may eventually reach a decision, but internal turmoil is likely to persist for some time. We'll have to wait and see for a more accurate answer. These days, many are most interested in whether President Trump can win the Nobel Peace Prize for this. In fact, even within the United States, there are conflicting opinions. Some say that Trump truly created peace, while others argue that his approach was not for peace, but rather for political gain. President Trump remains actively involved in resolving conflicts and wars. From the India-Pakistan war to conflicts like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda and Thailand-Cambodia disputes, some say the recent Gaza Strip ceasefire wouldn't have happened without his mediation and pressure. Trump pushed both sides with his characteristic direct negotiation style, and instead of relying on diplomatic logic, he produced results through practical pressure, showing a completely different approach from traditional diplomacy. However, despite these achievements, the chances of winning the Nobel Peace Prize remain low, mainly due to institutional factors. Nobel Peace Prize nominations end in January, but the Gaza peace deal was reached in early October. President Trump's Nobel Peace Prize-worthy achievements haven't been recorded. Of course, there is still a possibility that he could be nominated as a candidate next year, but the problem is that the Peace Prize Committee is very conservative and tries to avoid political controversy. Trump remains a controversial figure nationally and internationally. In particular, the tariff wars that occurred during his term, as well as his remarks about reducing support for Ukraine, have made him a symbol of division in the international community. Because of this background, many believe that awarding the Nobel Peace Prize, which symbolizes peace, to Trump is realistically difficult. Nevertheless, President Trump's recent mediation is certainly a diplomatic achievement worthy of recognition. He broke away from the traditional framework of American foreign policy and brought about changes in the complex war structure of the Middle East through a new approach centered on deal-making diplomacy. International political experts analyze that President Trump's evaluation will depend on how long this Gaza ceasefire lasts. If the ceasefire brings full stability to Gaza, President Trump is expected to be nominated for next year's Nobel Peace Prize. President Trump truly deserves it. Seriously, consider how many wars he's stopped. He really does, right? It may be tough this year, but I think it's definitely possible next year. The world is viewing the Gaza Strip ceasefire positively. Numerous countries worldwide have pledged humanitarian and financial aid to Gaza. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, said on X that all hostages should be released with dignity, a permanent ceasefire ensured, and the war fully stopped. Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President, thanked mediators for securing the ceasefire and called for a permanent ceasefire to advance a two-state solution. Many countries, including South Korea, welcomed the Gaza Strip ceasefire. I hope that from now on I can continue to deliver only this kind of news to you. Although there is still a long way to go, the fact that the first step has been taken and both sides have reached an agreement is very significant. How do you think the war in Gaza will progress? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.